High above the shifting tides of global power, a silent storm brews, one that will ripple across continents and redraw the lines of influence between East and West. For decades, the world has watched the battle for control, an endless chess game where nations vie to dominate resources, influence governments, and shape the future. At the heart of this struggle stands Africa, a continent rich with promise, yet shackled by the shadows of old empires. But change is coming. In the capital of Burkina Faso, a leader rises. Ibrahim Traoré is no ordinary man. He carries with him a vision, bold, unyielding, a vision for African sovereignty, for a continent free from the invisible chains of foreign powers, a vision where Africa charts its own destiny, unafraid and united. Today, that vision takes flight. President Traoré's journey is more than a diplomatic mission. It is a daring step into the eye of a geopolitical storm. His destination, Moscow. There, amid the historic walls of power, a meeting awaits, one whispered about in backrooms and feared by capitals across the West. An alliance is about to be forged, a partnership destined to shake the foundations of the global order. But this path is fraught with peril. Western powers watch with growing alarm. The United States and France, nations long accustomed to wielding influence in Africa, see Traoré's move as a threat, a challenge that cannot be ignored. The stakes have never been higher. This is a story of courage, defiance, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. It is the story of a leader, an alliance, and a world on the brink of change. And it begins now. The first light of dawn spilled gently over Ouagadougou, the vibrant heart of Burkina Faso. The city stirred to life with the usual sounds, vendors setting up their stalls, children laughing in the distance, and the hum of morning traffic weaving through the streets. Yet inside the walls of the presidential palace, a different kind of energy pulsed. A weighty sense of purpose filled the air as President Ibrahim Traoré prepared for a journey that would carry more than just a man. It carried the hopes and aspirations of an entire continent. This was no ordinary diplomatic trip. Ibrahim's mission was steeped in history and significance. The upcoming summit in Moscow marked the 80th anniversary of a pivotal victory, a moment frozen in time that symbolized resilience and strength against overwhelming odds. But for Ibrahim, it was also a chance to send a message to the world, and especially to the powers who had long dictated Africa's fate. His vision was clear and unwavering. African nations must reclaim their sovereignty, shed the chains of colonial influence, and step onto the global stage as equals. Burkina Faso would lead by example, forging new alliances that respected dignity and independence. Far from the African plains, in the shadowed chambers of Washington and Paris, this vision did not go unnoticed. The United States and France, countries with decades of involvement and vested interests across Africa, watched with growing concern. To them, Ibrahim's move was not just bold, it was dangerous. It threatened to unravel decades of influence and control. Quiet meetings took place behind closed doors. Advisors spoke in hushed tones. Strategies were drawn and orders prepared. Their intention was clear: intercept the flight, prevent the message from reaching Moscow, and assert dominance once more. As the presidential jet powered down the runway, engines humming with controlled strength, Ibrahim took his seat with steady resolve. Outside, the world seemed ordinary, the sky calm and wide. But above the clouds, forces far greater than weather were about to collide. Hours passed as the plane cut through the vast expanse of sky, its course steady and true. Inside the cockpit, the crew maintained vigilance, eyes flickering between instruments and radar screens. Then, suddenly, a shift, a flicker on the radar. Two fast-moving blips appeared, growing rapidly larger, closing the distance. The unmistakable silhouettes of fighter jets emerged on the radar screen. American and French warplanes deployed to intercept and force a change of course. A crackling voice broke the fragile silence over the radio, cold and commanding. Orders were issued, warnings shouted: turn back, divert, or face the consequences. But Ibrahim's determination did not waver. For him, this was not just a flight, it was a stand. A declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer be dictated to from afar. His country's sovereignty was not a bargaining chip. The plane held its course, steady against the encroaching threat. The air grew thick with tension as the jets flanked the presidential plane, a silent ballet of power and defiance. Above the Atlantic Ocean, far from the eyes of most of the world, a quiet yet monumental clash was underway. A confrontation not fought with guns, but with wills. The outcome of this aerial standoff would ripple far beyond the skies, signaling a shift in the global balance and heralding a new chapter for Africa's role on the world stage. The sky above the vast Atlantic transformed into a stage of silent tension. The presidential jet, steady and unyielding, was now flanked by sleek fighter jets cutting through the clouds like shadows of defiance. The powerful roar of their engines echoed a warning. This was no ordinary escort. It was a blockade. Jets from the United States and France twisted and turned with precision, a calculated display of force meant to intimidate and coerce. Their movements choreographed for maximum psychological pressure, tight formations, sudden bursts of speed, and calculated passes close enough to send a message, but far enough to avoid open conflict. Within the presidential plane, the atmosphere tightened. The crew remained calm, but alert, listening as the radio crackled to life with terse commands and warnings. This is United States Air Command. You are violating restricted airspace. Change course immediately, or we will be forced to engage. A French voice cut in shortly after, mirroring the stern ultimatum. The response was resolute silence. No surrender. No retreat. Suddenly, from the east, a new sound tore through the tension. The unmistakable drone of Russian fighter jets slicing through the sky. Emerging from the horizon, they surged forward with unwavering purpose, closing ranks around the presidential plane as a protective shield. This was no mere coincidence. The arrival of the Russian squadron sent a clear and powerful message. Ibrahim Traoré was under Moscow's protection, and any attempt to disrupt his mission would have consequences far beyond the skies above. The aerial chessboard had shifted. Western jets hesitated, their calculated aggression replaced by cautious assessment. The balance of power was no longer theirs alone to command. For a moment, the sky held its breath. The possibility of confrontation lingered like a storm cloud ready to burst. Yet, reason and strategy prevailed. The United States and French forces, weighing the risks of escalating into a direct clash with Russia, reluctantly began to withdraw. One by one, the fighter jets pulled back, receding into the distance as the Russian jets maintained their vigilant formation around Ibrahim's plane. This dramatic standoff had ended without a shot fired, but its implications resonated far beyond the clouds. Politically, it marked a turning point, the bold assertion of African sovereignty backed by a formidable global power. Militarily, it showcased a new era of proxy dynamics, where the skies above Africa had become a contested battleground for influence. Around the world, intelligence agencies and governments absorbed the news in stunned silence. The message was unmistakable. The geopolitical landscape was shifting. For Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, it was a moment of triumph and unprecedented support. But for the West, it was a warning that their grip on Africa was loosening. The aerial showdown was more than a confrontation in the sky. It was a declaration that a new world order was on the horizon. As the presidential jet touched down on the frost-kissed runway of Moscow's Vnukovo Airport, a moment heavier than the winter air settled over the scene. This was no ordinary arrival. It was a historic crossing of thresholds, one where the hopes of a continent and the shifting tides of global power converged. The Russian delegation awaited with a blend of ceremony and purpose. Flags fluttered in the cold breeze, but beneath the formal gestures lay a deeper significance, a recognition of a partnership forged not just in politics, but in shared ambition. At the forefront stood President Vladimir Putin, a figure both formidable and calculating. As Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the tarmac, their eyes met with the kind of measured intensity reserved for those who understood stakes. Their handshake was brief yet charged, a silent pact that reverberated far beyond Moscow's city limits. Cameras captured the moment, but the true significance was known only to those who grasped the currents beneath the surface. This was the dawn of a new alliance, one destined to challenge old orders and reshape global narratives. Inside the Kremlin's imposing halls, the atmosphere was solemn yet hopeful. Putin's voice carried the weight of history and the promise of the future as he addressed Ibrahim and assembled diplomats. He spoke of sovereignty as an inviolable right, the bedrock upon which nations must stand. He lauded Ibrahim's defiance against external pressures and his unwavering commitment to his people's freedom. To stand tall as a nation, Putin declared, is to claim one's rightful place in the world, free from interference, free to determine one's own destiny. Ibrahim listened intently, the gravity of these words resonating deeply. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was steady but charged with passion. He painted a vision not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa, a continent awakening from the long shadows of subjugation. He called for unity, for solidarity among African nations, to rise together and demand recognition and respect. This is not merely a political alliance, Ibrahim proclaimed. It is a declaration that Africa will no longer be a chess piece on the world's board. It is a call for self-determination, for partnership on equal terms. Behind the scenes, intense diplomatic discussions unfolded. Advisors and strategists from both nations deliberated on military cooperation, plans to ensure that sovereignty will be defended not just in words but through strength. Economic ties were explored, promising investments, infrastructure projects, and trade agreements designed to foster resilience and independence. Political frameworks were mapped out to amplify Africa's voice in global forums, to ensure that decisions affecting the continent would no longer be made without its input. The alliance took shape not just as a pact of convenience, but as a shared vision, a mutual commitment to rewrite the rules of international engagement. For Burkina Faso, this was a turning point. For Africa, a beacon of hope. And for the world, a clear signal. The balance of power was shifting. Across continents, the ripples spread. In capitals accustomed to unquestioned influence, unease settled. The partnership between Ibrahim Traoré and Vladimir Putin was more than an alliance. It was a challenge to the established order. As the summit progressed, the message was unmistakable. Africa was no longer willing to be silent. With allies by its side, it would stand tall, assert its sovereignty, and claim its place on the world stage. The handshake on the tarmac was only the beginning. A new chapter had begun, one written with courage, unity, and a determination that would echo through history. The aftermath of the historic alliance between Ibrahim Traoré and Vladimir Putin sent shockwaves rippling across the globe. In Western capitals, the response was swift and resolute. Diplomatic corridors buzzed with urgency as officials grappled with the reality of a new power dynamic taking shape far from their control. Washington and Paris issued stern warnings. Behind closed doors, sanctions were drafted, economic pressures designed to isolate Burkina Faso and discourage other nations for following its lead. Aid programs were threatened, and trade restrictions loomed as tools of influence wielded to maintain the old order. Yet, these measures only underscored the growing anxiety that Africa's path was shifting irrevocably. Across the continent, a different story was unfolding. Leaders and citizens watched with cautious hope as Ibrahim's bold stand ignited spark. Inspired by his resolve and the powerful support from Russia, African nations began to reconsider their own alliances and futures. A network of partnerships started to take root. Countries like South Africa, Algeria, and Zimbabwe looked toward this new model of cooperation, one based not on subjugation, but mutual respect and shared growth. Economic agreements blossomed, promising investments in infrastructure, technology, and energy. Military cooperation expanded, aimed at strengthening defense capabilities and safeguarding sovereignty against external interference. Ibrahim Traoré's vision extended beyond borders. He spoke passionately of Pan-African unity, a continent united not just by geography, but by common purpose. This partnership with Russia was the catalyst for a broader movement, one that sought to reclaim Africa's voice on the world stage. Global geopolitics began to shift. The long-standing dominance of Western powers in Africa faced unprecedented challenges. The balance of influence tilted as new alliances redrew maps of power and cooperation. For the first time in decades, Africa was no longer a passive player, but a formidable force shaping its own destiny. The era of unquestioned Western hegemony was giving way to a more multipolar world, where voices once marginalized now demanded to be heard. The alliance between Ibrahim Traoré and Vladimir Putin symbolized this change, a beacon of hope and a harbinger of a new world order. As the dust settled from the dramatic confrontation and the days that followed, one truth became clear. The future belonged to those who dared to stand firm, who forged new paths with courage and conviction. Africa's journey toward unity, strength, and sovereignty had entered a bold new chapter, and the world was watching. From the quiet dawn over Ouagadougou to the charged skies above the Atlantic, from the tense aerial standoff to the historic handshake in Moscow, the journey of Ibrahim Traoré has been one of courage, conviction, and change. A flight that began as a simple diplomatic mission became a bold statement, a refusal to accept old hierarchies and a demand for respect. The standoff in the skies was not just a battle of machines, but a clash of wills, signaling a shift in power and purpose. And at its heart, the alliance forged between Ibrahim Traoré and Vladimir Putin stands as a testament to a new era, a partnership rooted in sovereignty, mutual respect, and shared vision. Africa is awakening. Its voice, once silenced or ignored, now rises with strength and clarity. It is a continent reclaiming its narrative, redefining its future, and challenging the world to see it not as a playground for others, but as a powerful actor on the global stage. This story is one of unity, resilience, and hope. It reminds us that true power lies not in domination, but in the courage to stand firm, the will to unite, and the determination to shape one's destiny. As we close this chapter, one question remains. What will this alliance mean for the future of global politics? How will the world respond to a rising Africa, backed by new partnerships and unwavering resolve? The answer is yet to be written. But one thing is certain, this is only the beginning. If you found this story inspiring and want to follow the unfolding journey of Ibrahim Traoré and the changing world around him, make sure to subscribe to Ibrahim Traoré Parables. Hit the bell icon to stay updated with every new chapter as we explore powerful stories of courage, unity, and the fight for sovereignty.